Welcome to the Fellows Research Program seminar series. So I'd like to thank Ira and El Shaddai Abraham for putting this all together. I'm trying to find a document in the age of Zoom on my computer. Bear with me, sorry. Hold on, I'm sorry. So we're very happy to introduce Joël Kotek to you this afternoon. Joel will be speaking. The title of his talk is Perceptions of the Jew and the Other in French-Speaking Schools in Belgium. Joël Kotek is a professor at the Free University of Brussels and at the Institut Études Politiques de Paris. He's also a research scholar at the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, and he's a member of the Historical Review of the Holocaust of the Shoah in Paris, the Jewish Museum of Warsaw, Melchelen Holocaust Museum Foundation. He's part of the Foundation of Adeline and the Evans Foundation in Antwerp, Yahad in Unim, Paris, and was the head of the formation department at the Memorial de Shoah Center of Documentation. He's been involved in the study of anti-Semitism for many years. He was associated with the Moshe Kantor Center on Anti-Semitism and Racism at Tel Aviv University, and he's written important works, including La Shoah dans la bande dessinée in 2017, and Les Quatrième Partage de la Pologne in 2015, Israel et les malades and the Media Belgique francophone au miroir du conflit de Gaza in the summer of 2014, which was translated into English by ISGAP. So he's just worked on this very important study in Belgium, and we're really honored that Joel will speak to us about his research and issues relevant not only for the Belgian context, but for the wider European and global context. So Joel has been a key speaker, teacher on our Summer Institute for many years at Oxford. So Joel, it's great to have you back, and thank you for taking the time to contribute your knowledge to our network of experts on anti-Semitism.
Well, thank you, Charles, and thank you, Ira. And I just published a book on BDS to demonstrate that BDS, in fact, is a kind of war organization and an anti-Semitic organization, etc. It was published 6 months ago in France and Belgium. So what I will speak today about research that I made actually for 2 years on representation of the other in Belgian Francophone youth. And let's start to see how it works. Sorry. So the start of my presentation is the fact, the denial about anti-Semitism in Belgium, in France, and it used to be also in Europe. It is only fairly recently that the academic, media, and political world have come to accept the idea that Muslim anti-Semitism exists, that Muslim anti-Semitism is a real issue. And that's a real issue, especially for the maintenance of living together. Muslim anti-Semitism now in France is being debated. And unfortunately, it's still not the case in Belgium, where I live. In Belgium, you can't find any scientific studies conducted on the question of anti-Semitism at school, but it concerns not only schools, but in general, it's a non-topic anti-Semitism. It's a blind spot, as I said, since I would say the Holocaust. And you remember that there was an attack, a terrorist attack on the Jewish Museum in 2014. And despite this terrorist attack, nothing really did change in Belgium. It didn't provoke any particular awareness, and certainly not new research on the topic. And this is strange because everyone knows, I mean, politicians, journalists, etc., and of course, scientists know that in Belgium today, only places specifically Jewish, like nurseries, schools, and youth movements, are being subject to daily military surveillance. people knows that, if you're a Jew, if you are in a Jewish institution, you can be, the object of a terrorist attack. But there is a kind of denial. And why? According to me, there are three main reasons of the denial in Belgium. The first will be what I would say, the post-Marxist software. It means most social scientists have theorized the death of anti-Semitism. Why? Because they consider now that the Jews are white people. They are bourgeois, they're white people. And so as white people, they cannot be victim of racism. And that's why, the new Jews are the Muslim. This is more or less the new doxa that you will find in Belgium. The second reason will be what I call the anti-fascist vision. The same social scientists, etc., but also journalists cannot conceive an anti-Semitism other than from the extreme right. Extreme right anti-Semite, but there can't be any left-wing and certainly not Muslim anti-Semitism. And the third one, which is maybe the main reason in a sense, would be what I called political electoralism. You have to know that Islamic religion, this is really the key factor, is on the way to becoming the leading religion in Brussels. It means the leading religion. Some people say that in the year 2040, Islam will be the first religion in Brussels. So it means that, votes, it's important, and you have to be near your voters, etc. And you have to accept not to attack them frontally, etc. Yet, as I said, all the surveys carried out abroad underline the prevalence of Arab Muslim anti-Semitism. But of course, this reality is hard to accept. The young people of our suburbs, indeed the first victim of ordinary racism, are the main vector of contemporary anti-Semitism. And this reality, it's a reality that our Belgian researchers intend to avoid. So, I mean that the doxa is stronger than reality. And I will give you one example, but it's really striking, if this is a correct expression. There was a research carried out in 2017 by a team of researchers from my university and from the University of Liège, the second Francophone city in Belgium, which is that Muslim anti-Semitism didn't exist. And of course, and it was, as I said, a good example of the kind of non-research that you could find in my country. And they published a leaflet called Anti-Semitism and Immigration in Western Europe Today. Is there a connection? Of course, they demonstrated the research that there were absolutely no connection. And it was, widely reported in the press. This is a front page of the main daily newspaper in Belgium. Inter-university study conducted in 5 countries breaks down a prejudice. No anti-Semitism, etc. And the person who did the research were interviewed in the radio, etc. And everyone was happy. Muslim anti-Semitism doesn't exist. And I quote, anti-Semitic acts do not increase and are unrelated to the presence of recent migrants from the Middle East and North Africa. And remember, Middle East and North Africa, it is the double teaching of a vast, also important, vast investigation, which we would consult en primeur, and etc., etc., etc. And what is interesting is to see that actually I was interviewed, and I say, of course, exactly the contrary to the people actually interview me, but this is not the most important. How many people did the research interview to know if there is this kind of anti-Semitism? They actually interview 3 people. So this research was based on 3 interviews. One from Guinea, the second from Eritrea, nothing to do with Middle East, and the third was the Eritrean translator. So you can imagine, the climax of research concerning anti-Semitism in Belgium. There was one notable exception concerning the research on anti-Semitism in Brussels, in Belgium, I would say. It was a study conducted in 2011 by a Flemish professor of sociology, Marc Elchardus, and this man actually, finally highlight the reality of a very high prevalence of anti-Semitism among Muslim students. And of course, he did interview 3 people. Elchardus did interview around 1,200 pupils of Flemish schools in Brussels. And if you read his findings, he reveals in his finding that about half of them, it means half of the young Muslims, present anti-Semitic opinions. Half, 50%. And as I said, El Chardus reveals the reality of a very strong anti-Semitic bias among young Muslims, etc. And what is interesting again, this study went completely unnoticed in the French-speaking Belgium. Why? Because of the fear of reality. You know, people couldn't bear this. And the question is, was El Chardus right or wrong? True or false? And of course, there were no counter-investigation. As I said, total silence, denial. And this is the reason why I decided my own research, and I decided to verify the results of El Chardus. And that's why I conduct a counter-investigation in 2018 and 2019 on the team of young people and the others. And the research, of course, the goal of the research was to address the notion of anti-Semitism, but not also anti-Semitism. Also what is called wrongly Islamophobia, racism, homophobia, and misogyny. This time in the French-speaking school network in Brussels. Remember that the Chardus, research in the Dutch-speaking schools network in Brussels. Our study, is quite representative of Brussels youth because there are around 112 French-speaking schools in Brussels, and we succeed to give our questionnaire in 38 schools. It means about a third of all French-speaking schools in Brussels, all networks, seculars as Catholic, all branches, general, technical, and professional, etc. And so we succeed to interview around 1,674 young people between the age of 16 and 22, which means that our results, contrary to the result that I spoke before, is quite representative of a representation of Brussels youth. So the question is, what does our data on youth people in Brussels reveal? Are we in accordance with El Chardus or not? And the first observation is that we find a globally tolerant and naive, and I will come back to the word naive youth. Our survey reveals a French-speaking youth that is generally open and welcoming towards the other. On the whole, Belgian youth seems to be committed to the norms of cultural liberalism. And I think it's the same in the States, of course. This does not mean that the youth are totally free of racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic prejudice, of course not. One example, 13% agrees, 13% of our panel, I mean total being 1,774, agrees that Jews constitute the race, which is quite a lot. But you will see that between those 13%, a lot of those will be from Muslim origin, from Muslim religion, etc. 14 of the respondents who declared themselves non-believer and 27% of the Catholic respondents do not plan to marry a Muslim spouse. And the same proportion of Muslims do not consider marrying a Christian spouse. So, but if prejudice against both Jews and Muslims is far from having disappeared, what is important, I think, to stress, what appears is that, racism as anti-Semitism is contained and declining, especially compared to older generation. For example, our survey shows that the terrorist attack on Belgian soil did not lead to a rejection of Islam as such. For instance, there is a very low Islamophobia. Only 2% of our respondents link Islam and terrorism, which is in a sense strange, if I may say so. So that's why I say a tolerant but maybe naive youth, because our survey paints the portrait of a generation sensitive to human rights and otherness, and also, as I say, a generation maybe with a little bit of naive representation. Example, according to all of our respondents, Muslim as not Muslim, Islam is seen as the religion with the most positive image. This is, you see Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and you will see that more people will consider Islam as a religion of peace than Christianity and Judaism. Islam is, according to all of our respondents, the religion with the most positive image. And our panel also have the same tolerance for the wearing of the full veil. And I say the full veil, and you will see that a relative majority for the full veil among non-Muslim. You will see that 39% of non-Muslim are supportive of the fact that Muslim women could wear a full veil. So Muslim also are considered as the first victim of discrimination. In the eyes of our respondents, Muslim appears in any case as the first victims of discrimination. 39% of non-Muslim believe that Islam is the most persecuted religion, and this figure rises to 64% for the Muslim students surveyed. And this is, well, it's in French, I'm sorry. It was published in a French magazine, and you see the perception, of the most persecuted religion, and you will see that Islam is far from being, considered as the most persecuted religion, even compared to Judaism and to Christianity. And if you remember, if you know what happened, for instance, in Africa, etc., or I would say Middle East in general, you can ask questions about this feeling, actually. Muslims are seen as the most persecuted minority, as I said, far ahead of Jews, atheists, and Christians, etc. Only 2% of Muslims agrees with the idea that people, because they are Christians, can be persecuted because of the belief. Let's remember the fate of the Muslim in Iraq or in Syria. So yet, there is the reality, and the reality is quite different. Let us remember that between Paris, between France and Belgium, 17 Jews were murdered because they were Jews by young Muslims. Yet, and that's why, in a sense, I wonder if this is not a kind of Stockholm Syndrome, because our statistics shows that in Belgium, as in France, since 2000, anti-Semitic acts are proportionally more frequent than anti-Muslim acts, even though Jews represent barely 0.25% of the Belgian population and Muslim 6 to 7%, and even roughly 40% of the total Brussels population. There are 60 times more Muslim people in Brussels than Jews. And still the Jews are victim of racism, etc., more than the Muslim, etc. And so it comes to my second observation, the weight of Islam, and maybe this is the most important. Our survey confirms Islam's importance weight in the Brussels region. With the interview, as I said, our panel is quite representative, 38 schools out of 112, and it appears that 39% of the young people surveyed claim to be Muslim, means almost 40%. And this is another representation. You can see that there are more Muslim than Christian, than atheist and other religion. Unfortunately, we don't have the figures for the Protestant people. There are not so many actually in Belgium. So the evidence, of course, raises a question. Could we still consider Muslim as a minority? So our study also shows that, and this is also important, that Muslim pupils are against the trends towards cultural liberalism and religious disaffection that had spread to all Belgian youth of Catholic origin. Muslim appears to be clearly engaged in a process of reactivating religion. 81% of our sample declare themselves to be practicing Muslim. On the other hand, our survey, as I said, confirms the strong secularization of Belgium of Christian and Jewish origin, as well as the increasing marginalization of the latter. We only find in our study 12 Jews, which is really nothing. So the number of students who declare themselves irreligious, atheists, and unbelievers is higher than of Catholics, 27% versus 25%. There are more cultural Catholic than practicing Catholic in our sample. So you see really the difference. Our third observation is the religion effect. Young people in Brussels stand out very clearly in their relation to the other, depending on their relationship to religion. And this is undoubtedly the main finding of this study. Our study validates the conclusion of numerous surveys from Germany. Let's think about Gunther Jekyll to France, all of which have demonstrated the weight of religion and cultural factors in the fabrication of anti-Semitism. With regard to anti-Semitism, but also to sexism and homophobia, it is not so much socioeconomic factors, but cultural and religious representation that must be questioned. Practicing Catholics and Muslims have shared significantly the same prejudice. When it comes to sexism, anti-Semitism, or homophobia, it is therefore much less the socioeconomic factors than the cultural factors and religious representation that need to be questioned. As I said, Catholics and Muslim Catholic practicing share significantly the same prejudice. On the other hand, in general, cultural Catholics, it means non-practicing Catholics, have similar views to non-believers. Young radical Catholics appears to have 2 times more anti-Semitic prejudice than non-believers, and Muslim 3 times more. And this is regardless of their gender, educational background, and level of education, and or socioeconomic background of the parents. So really the religion effect seems to be the most important. And this is an example. This is, I think, a very clear figures of what I tried to explain. If you can see, the question, Jews prefer Israel to their countries, Zionists are criminals, Jews control banks with Freemasons, Shoah is exaggerated, the 11th September is a Mossad and the CIA plot, and you can see, the difference between, the gray or the light blue and I would say the green, which are the Muslim. And you will see very clearly that the bias, the prejudice of the Muslim are 3 times more than the bias of, I would say, the atheist people, and the practicing Catholic 2 times. And this is very clearly shown. The other, I would say, the other graphic also show it. Zionists are criminal, the Jews control the bank with Freemasons, Jews prefer Israel to their countries. 11th September is a Mossad and CIA plot. And then you will see that 38% of practically Muslims believe that the Zionists are criminal, that the Jews control the bank with the Freemasonry, etc. It means, and the Mossad did the 11th of September. It means between 30 and 40%, which is actually quite a lot. Another one, the only question, the Jews control the banks with the help of the Freemason, and you will see that no opinion, and this is also very strange. There are a lot of non-opinion people actually who has no opinion, but you will see the difference between non-believers and between, Muslim people, etc. Our study also, of course, after what I said, our study underlined the Islam effect, not only the religion effect, but I would say even more the Islam effect in the pejorative representation of the other. Anti-Semitic prejudice are very present among Brussels youth of the Muslim faith. Without really being able to quantify hostility towards the Jews, you remember that, as Jardus spoke about 50% of anti-Semitism within the Flemish Muslim youth, we don't know. But it is clear that Muslim respondents are 3 times, as I said, more likely than non-believers to share anti-Semitic prejudices, and I said again, regardless of their educational background, sex, filial study, or the level of religiosity. In some cases, Muslim high school girls even reveal more conservative attitude than their male co-religionists. For example, 40% of practicing Muslim women refuse to consider marriage with a Jewish spouse, compared to 29% of Muslim men. The religious factor, as I said, predominates over the others, without canceling them out, of course. So the question I said, if you remember, does the Jew constitute a race? well, only 6% of non-believer, consider Jews constitute a race. But if you consider the Muslim, it's going to be 80% of them. It's almost, as I said, almost 3 times more. The same, if 6% of non-believer believe that the Shoah results are inflated, this rate climbs to 21% for Muslim as a whole. And more than 35% of Muslims believe that the Jews, as I said, control the banks and the media with the Freemasons, and more than 35% believe that Zionists are criminals. And I will come also to a fourth observation: ignorance of history and conspiracy theory. If there is one thing that unites all our respondents, it is their abysmal ignorance of history. All questions that concern knowledge, not values, have appalling no opinion rates. The non-response rate is frightening when it comes to the genocide of the Armenians. 63% never heard about it. The Tutsi, 73%, Hitler's malignancy, and even when it comes to non-believer, 34% of non-believers do not express an opinion on the question concerning Adolf Hitler, which is really appalling, if I may say. Question about Holocaust. Is the Holocaust greatly exaggerated? Well, only 47% of the total consider no. You will see that 39 have no opinion. They're not to respond. But if you see the difference between the non-believer and the Muslim, you will see a big difference. Only 6% of non-believers believe that it is exaggerated. And only 27% have, which is a lot, it's a third, have no opinion. But if you take the Muslim, you will see that 31% consider that Holocaust is greatly exaggerated, and half of them have no opinion. Only 21% disagree with this. Another question that we ask: do you consider Gaza worse than Auschwitz, which is terrible? Well, only 3% say yes. And this is the atheists. Only 3% of the atheists consider that Gaza was worse than Auschwitz. This is okay, but consider 75% didn't dare to answer. And if you take into consideration the Muslim respondents, you will see that 38% will consider that Gaza was worse than Auschwitz. And half of them didn't dare to have an opinion. Only 8% consider that Gaza wasn't worse than Auschwitz. Our survey validates several European studies and polls, all of which reveal a strong permeation of conspiracy among young people. Thus, among our respondents, 28% of Muslims and 15% of practicing Catholics think that Mossad is behind the attack of September 11, compared with 8% of non-believers. And those are the graphics connected to the question, 11th of September. And there you see the difference between the non-believers, 8% who believes it, and the Muslim, 28% believe it was a Zionist plot, etc. And I will finish with my fifth observation, and it's, well, in a sense, a conclusion. We can see that our survey shows that Arab Muslim students are against the trend towards cultural liberalism that has spread to other Belgian youth. Their aspiration appears to be clearly conservative in terms of social and cultural values. And they are characterized by what we can call a certain societal and cultural illiberalism, etc. And there you can see it on the graphic there. We asked several questions. For instance, are you for or against the death penalty in case of a female adultery? Are women equal to men? Would you agree to have an homosexual as a teacher? What do you believe, that religion law takes precedence over civil law? It means the Sharia, or I would say the Bible, compared to the civil law. And is Darwinism a false theory or not? And then clearly you see the difference. You will see blue, it's the secular people. Then you will see the difference between the blue line, the secular people, and the green line, which are, or around 1,000 Muslim population that we have been interviewed. And you can see really what I call the illiberalism. And you can see that the problem is not only anti-Semitism, it's not only, I would say, the representation of the Jews as such. So it means it has nothing to do with the Middle East. It has the question of a representation of the female, of the homosexual, of the other in general, etc. And this graphic, I think it's very clear concerning this. And then if we speak only about the women, it means sexism, etc. And we ask, the woman must not behave like boys, women should stay at home, the woman must obey the man, women are equal to men, men and women should have the same education. And then also you will see the difference between, I would say, a secular people and I would say a Muslim young adult, etc. You would see, of course, that's why we use different colors: green for the Muslim, red for, it means for the practicing Catholic, pink for the cultural Catholic, and then for the non-believer we use the color blue. And you see the difference. You see the difference between what we call liberalism, cultural liberalism, and illiberalism, etc. So conclusion. And my conclusion is Islamo-leftism has a logical consequence. Why? It may therefore seem paradoxical that, as many surveys points out, Muslims vote preferably for two parties on the left of the French-speaking Belgian political spectrum. Three parties. They will vote Labour, they will vote Green, and they will vote even for the Maoist, PTB. And in a sense, they vote for extreme left parties, but they have conservative values. So this undoubtedly translates into a phenomenon of reciprocal reinforcements, where parties traditionally considered progressive do not hesitate to flirt with an associative fabric close to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is very active in Brussels. It's normal, considering that 40% of the population in Brussels are Muslim. In a sense, you have to go near, you have to flatter them, and you have more or less to accept more or less what they want. And those extreme or those left parties or extreme left parties may also integrate, and actually did integrate within the rank supporters of a conservative, even rigorous Islam, in the name of a conception of religious freedom that reinforce precisely these more conservative tendencies. All this, of course, in the name of freedom of conscience. For instance, the Socialist Party in Brussels will not take within its rank, I would say, non-believer, non-Muslim, it means a liberal Muslim, but they would prefer to choose a Muslim near or linked to the mosques, etc. So, conclusion, last sentence, the challenge is in Belgium, Islamization of the left, which seems to be the case, or which I would prefer, secularization of Muslim. Thank you very much. J'entends rien.
Joel, thank you very much. Thank you for your insightful and important work. And as you were speaking, I was remembering the words of Elie Wiesel, who said that anti-Semitism always begins with Jews, but it doesn't end with Jews. And that once we unleash this form of hatred in society, it knows about no boundaries. And you can see how anti-Semitism is directly correlated to other forms of hatred, including sexism and other issues. So your work is very important, as always, Joel. So thank you for being here and presenting. We're opening up your cameras. So we're a smallish group. We're about 30 people. So you have the option to open your cameras and we can have a informal conversation. There's quite a few scholars on our call. Some of our research fellows are with us. So I'm going to not take up too much of the time and try to integrate as many people as possible. Tarrant, you have a question. I could read it, or you're very welcome to open your camera and ask Joel directly. Is Tarrant still here?
Who are you addressing?
Still going about opening up the cameras, so it might take a moment.
So just we'll let everybody open the cameras, and I'm receiving some questions here. And Tarrant Zhibidnik.
Hello. Now you can see me. Hi. Hello to all. Hello, Joel. Thank you very much for this very interesting research. I have a couple of questions that I'm asking in order to navigate your data and findings so that I can understand them better. Could you please elaborate how did you perform this study? Was it were it interviews, were it questionnaires? You say that the sample size was about 1,770 students. On how many schools? I understand these were high schools. Were there in like central Brussels or in the peripheries, or could you tell us something more about those schools? I understand that representation of Muslims in those schools influenced results for these schools. I think you have explained that, so that question seems to be answered. And one last question. In your study, you differentiate between practicing and non-practicing Catholics. Is the same possible to do with the Muslim populations or the Muslim students, and how would that affect the results? Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Hello. So what we try to do, actually, there are, as I said, there are 112 schools in Brussels. And what is Brussels? Brussels is a region. Brussels is composed by, like in France, by 18 arrondissements, 18, and including Molenbeek. So it means Molenbeek will be there, the Brussels as such, and then, so it means it's representative of the Brussels regions, etc., which is populated by around 1,200,000 people. So you will find only 112 schools. And what we did, and someone will translate to me, tirage au sort. How would you say tirage au sort? We did, on a tiré au sort.
You choose randomly.
Yes, we choose randomly 60 schools and 38 respond. And representative of, we did out of 18 municipalities, we succeed to have 17. And including Molenbeek. Molenbeek was the center of, what happened in, the terrorist attack, both in France and in Brussels, etc. So, and what we did, well, we sent students, some of my students, they went to schools, and we had a kind of questionnaire, Google form, and they did answer on Google form in classes with professors. So it means it was, of course, we did it with the direction of schools, of course, because the research was financed by the Ministry of French Education. So, and that's why we succeed to have so many people. And it's,
great.
I would say, quite representative of Belgian youth. And that's why also we have so many Muslims, because as you know, and it's not the case anywhere else in Belgium, but Brussels and Antwerp have a lot of Muslims, and especially Brussels. And some people would say that in 20 years, there will be a Muslim majority in Brussels, which is unique. I don't think you will find, maybe Rotterdam, you will find another city like Brussels. And I don't know if it's good or bad, it's a fact. I don't know. Okay, so what else did you ask, Binyef? You already in a difficult question.
I think one last question would be the issue of practicing and non-practicing.
And so okay, what we did, we asked our people if they were practicing or not. And what seems to be the case, there is a big difference between...
Oh, for God's sakes.
What?
Come on. Oh, for God's sakes.
Ira, please mute everybody, and then Joel can unmute himself.
Okay. So what we asked our people, and then we can see the difference between practicing Catholic and non-practicing Catholic. And as I said, but of course I was very, very quick, practicing Catholic, yes, their opinion are more connected to the Muslim as such. And non-practicing Catholic, it means cultural Catholic, their opinion, their representation are more likely to be like the non-believers. But what is interesting to see that we had around 1,025 Muslim, because as I said, there are 40%, and 81% of them said they were practicing. And this is really different. It means that 81, only 19% said they were not practicing. But what is interesting with Muslim, being practicing or not, they have the same opinion. And this you can see more or less if you see our tableau or graphic, you will see that there is not a big difference between practicing and non-practicing Muslim, contrary to the Catholic. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of Protestant. It could have been very much interested to have the opinion of Protestant. And actually, we didn't ask, which is in a sense sad. But it could have been interesting too, because we have a lot of African, which are, you know, Protestant like you will find in America.
Thank you.
Joel, thank you. And Taran, thank you. So we have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask David Ben Sasson to ask a question.
Yeah.
And will be
Right.
Saeed after
I
David.
had many questions I put on the chat, they disappeared somehow. But anyway, my question is, do you think that the situation in Belgium is similar to the one in France? And if not, how do you think it's different? Number two, I would like to know if Vatican II had any influence on the Catholic Church in Belgium, like it might have elsewhere.
Well, I think there is a big difference between France and Belgium. It means in France, there is a strong Jewish community. And if you have a strong Jewish community, you will find debates. And there is also what is called the French secularism, etc. So I think there is a debate in France. And sure, and France is characterized by huge debate. In Belgium, even if it's 1 hour, 20 minutes from Paris, you know, if you take the train, it's totally different. First, there is a very tiny Jewish community. It means we don't have a lot of intellectuals. So we are much more like, I would say, the Scandinavian country, where more or less we cannot do anything because, you know, we are. And also we have another kind of, I would say, electoral system, which means that, for instance, I'm still working in the Brussels Parliament, in our parliament. I would say that around 30% of my MPs are Muslim origin, means from Morocco, whatsoever, etc. It's a weight, which is a big difference. And you won't find so many MPs, for instance, in France, in Paris, because the electoral system is very different. It's in our system is a list. And so it means that, you know, you will have factor of, I would say, communautarism that doesn't exist in France. So the situation is quite difficult for us, I would say, but not only concerning Islam, but I would say also concerning in Flanders with extreme right. You have to know, for instance, that 2 weeks ago, the two main Nazi collaborators, Flemish Nazi collaborator, it means the equivalent of, I would say, Laval and Pétain, were honored by the Flemish parliament. They were honored. And those people, you know, were in favor of the Jewish deportation in 1941, 1942. And they were honored 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And what we did, we couldn't interrupt it because we don't have such intellectual, or I would say we don't have the level to do anything against it.
Sorry to add a small question, but do the media exacerbate the situation with respect to attitude toward Jews in Israel?
I'm sorry, repeat it?
Do the media exacerbate the situation?
Absolutely. Of course. The media is, I would say, Islamo-gauchiste, as we say in France.
Yeah.
If you understand Islamo, yes, because also we have a doxa. And the doxa is, you know, we have to protect the new Jews, and the new Jews being the Muslim. They are the new proletariat, as you know, of course.
So thank you. Saeed, you're up for, can you ask your question? Saeed, you have to unmute yourself. I don't think Saeed is there. Yeah, sorry, he is. Okay.
Yes, actually, concerning Catholicism.
Yes.
It's about Catholicism means that there was the Vatican II effect, but we have problem with the left Catholic. People like Pacifisti, and those people are much in favor. I would say they have strong connection with the Islamic Brotherhood in Belgium. Sorry.
So, Saeed, can you repeat your question? You're muted. Saeed, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
Excuse me. Thank you for your presentation. Good evening, Dr. Charles Smalls. It's
Hello.
great opportunity for me to join to this event. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Joël Kotek. My question is concerning which concrete policy is implemented in Belgium society for secularizing conservative effects of Islamism?
As
My
I
question.
said, the question is Islamization of our society, or I would say Europeization. And unfortunately, we go more towards the first trend. For instance, 2 weeks ago, our
Yes.
government accept that in schools people could wear the veil, for instance. So we go towards the demands, I would say, of the Muslim, unfortunately. And for instance, in Wallonia and in Flanders, ritual slaughter were forbidden. And of course, you cannot forbid it in Brussels. If not, you will lose the votes. So, as I said, the trend is more going to the Muslim demand. And this explains why also in the parliament of the region of Brussels, they vote, I think they almost voted yesterday, a BDS, for instance, a resolution. Because I would say anti-Zionism is the little common dominators for all those, I would say, parties. You know, it's very easy to criticize Israel. And this is the reality that we have in Belgium, and that didn't exist in Germany, and I would say in France or in England.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Said. Said, please mute yourself, please. And Ellen Cannon, Professor Ellen Cannon, you're up next. You have a question.
Thank you.
Thank
Professor Kotek, thank you for this just wonderful presentation, extremely important. I've been closely examining the French situation, especially after the attacks and the beheadings that recently took place. And the response of Macron has been to offer a new program to attempt to put a containment on the Islamization, or what he also defines as the separatism that is among the Islam communities. And among his recommendations was that the imams can no longer be imported from abroad, in which their teachings are definitely linked to Islamism, but imams must in the future be certified by the French government, going through a certain program to ensure that this will no longer be part of religious dogma and doctrine that is being passed on. Do you think that that is a possibility to also enter the Belgium situation? I'm extremely interested in your answer. And again, thank you for your brilliant work.
Thank you, Ellen. And just before Joel responds, the next person I'll call upon is Jonathan Lawrence. So get ready to ask your question. Go ahead, Joel. Thank you.
I speak?
Yes, please, Joel. Yeah.
So thank you for the question. Well, it's difficult to know what will happen, but as far as I know, as I told you, there is no debate like this. And if you remember, there were no response to the bombing of the Jewish Museum in Brussels. And the question and concerning, you know, this is the big difference, I would say, between France and between Belgium. And especially also you have to remind that Belgium as such doesn't exist. Belgium now has 3 regions, etc., 3 communities, etc. So it's also difficult to have, I would say, common ground. As I told you, on the Flemish, you've got a quite nationalist, you know, party, etc. And on the French part, you've got leftist parties, etc. So it's very difficult to have a consensus. And actually, as I told you, don't want to have a consensus, because even you will find a difference between the Brussels Socialist Party and the Wallonian Socialist Party, because you don't have a lot of Muslims in Wallonia, and you have, as I told you, as far as I know, as far as I've seen, 40% of the electorate of the Socialist Party in Brussels are Muslim. So it means the base, I would say, of the Labour Socialist Party today are composed by Muslims. So, you know, les pesanteurs are quite different.
Right.
And I don't think it will be possible to find a kind of common language concerning this question. And of course, I would say the influence of Diyanet, the Turkish Minister of Religion and of Moroccan, is extremely important in Belgium.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Joel. Jonathan?
Hello, good day. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. I would love to read the full report. I have one small question and one larger question. The small question has to do with the type of phrasing, I guess, in the survey questions that you give to students. And there was one question in particular that troubled me, which was asking them whether religious law should take precedence over civil law. And I thought, is that really a fair question if you don't specify which realm you're speaking of? Because after all, in our liberal democracies, we do allow religious communities to engage in some degree of alternative dispute resolution in a religious court of their choosing, as you're well aware, in Canada and the UK and the US and elsewhere. So could that not be a slightly misleading question if you don't say, except in matters of family law or divorce or inheritance or something like that, so that the student actually knows what question they're answering? Because otherwise they might just be answering your questions in a sense by with the sentiment that they're a good Muslim, right? When they're answering your questions, they're trying to say that they're a good person, not necessarily that they want to overthrow, the secular rule of law. But more generally, I think you've identified some really worrying symptoms, right? Some very, very dangerous symptoms. And I want to know more about the cause and the origins of these views. The last questioner, I think, raised a very important point about the role of the home governments. I think it's wrong to suggest that there is no role for home governments in this, because after all, what you want is informed clergy. You want to have trained imams, you want to have trained theologians. And until you have the conditions to supply that locally, you're simply blinding yourself by, you're spiting yourself by poking out your own eye, and depriving yourself, in fact, of trained professionals, especially in the case of a place like Morocco, but arguably even in the case of Turkey, where the Diyanet, like it or not, has been an effective anti-terrorism tool in Turkey and in Europe. Now, we might not like the trade-off that we're getting more Israel critical views, we're getting more politicized religion. But if the choice is between cutting off trained theologians, trained imams, and just allowing these youth to be subject to whatever they find on the internet or whomever they encounter on Facebook, I think that's very dangerous unless you have a plan to really subsidize the theological faculties and the seminaries that are going to train the imams, and to pay the imam salaries. And I know there is this to a certain extent in Belgium, but it's very small, it's very modest. It's modest everywhere. And unless the European governments get serious about, alas, respecting these basic needs, these religious infrastructural needs, we're going to be caught in this discussion of symptoms without getting to the root of really acknowledging Islam as one of the European religions and allowing for the institutions to take root that are going to create a more compatible religious community with the rule of law. And it's not going to come by just throwing yourself into the wilderness. But anyway, sorry, I went off on a rant. I apologize.
No, it's
Jonathan, could you identify yourself? You're a scholar, obviously. Where are you from? If I don't mind.
No, sure, yeah. Well, I'm from New York, but I'm a professor at Boston College, and I've been a think tanker in DC at Brookings, and I've written some books. One called "The Emancipation of Europe's Muslims," a new book that's just coming out now about Catholicism and Islam's relations with the modern state from a broad historical perspective.
So welcome and thanks for being here. And I know of some of your work, so nice that you're here. So Joel, please respond.
I think it's difficult to answer because it's your point of view, and I think, and of course,
Joel, can you speak louder? We don't hear you.
I think it's your point of view, but there is, I think, a big difference, I would say, between the French view of those problems and I would say the Anglo-Saxon view, which you represent in a sense, because I'm for the separation between church and the state, and especially I'm pushing for secularism, etc. And that's why we ask the question about not about the Sharia, because we try to be as neutral as possible. But what we speak about is a religion would predominate the civil law, etc. It's a fair question, because it's the same question if you say, what do you think that the Jews has too much influence in politics or in banks? You have to ask this kind of question. This is the only way, to know what they really believe, what they are. And of course, your interpretation, I would accept it, of course, too. That's why or if you will read or work, it's around 70 pages. And it could have been even 300 pages. It's so rich if you cross, I would say, all the elements that we collected. So that's why also I'm very opposed to the concept of racisation, blanchité, whiteness studies. I just wrote a big article on this. I think there is a cultural fight, I would say. There is nowadays concerning all those topics. And speaking about Turkey, well, I think their influence is quite negative. And nothing to concern with Jews, for instance. But if you take into consideration the Armenian question, you would see that almost now it's impossible to say that there was a kind of genocide of the Armenians, because you will have the reaction of those MPs from Turkish origin, etc., and also the influence of the Diyanet, etc. You have to understand the position that we have in Belgium, and that's why I support Macron, and I think Macron will try, I think, and he will, I hope, succeed to raise, a Muslim from a European Islam, which I suppose is the solution. As there is
it's 17 hours.
If I may, just one point about the Armenian issue, that's not an AK party position, that's a Turkish position. That's been the problem of all of the parties, secular or Islamic, and that goes for all of their separatist issues, whether Kurdish or otherwise. But I'm not presenting an Anglo-Saxon view. I take offense at that. I'm actually just recommending that countries like France and Belgium use their own instruments that they use currently with Jewish communities, with Catholic communities, with Protestant communities, to allow sometimes for the public subsidization of theological faculties, as takes place, as you know, in Strasbourg, in Alsace-Lorraine. And they have been talking about creating a French or European Islam for decades. I mean, come on, 3 decades. You think Macron is all of a sudden going to pull some rabbit out of a hat? The answers have been there for decades. And we might not like the answers, but at a certain point, we start spiting ourselves by not taking a pragmatic route. That's what I'm suggesting.
And so if I may, we're supposed to have a hard stop on the top of the hour. So we're going to run over another 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so. So we have a few more questions. Joel, I would like to say, in part as a response to Jonathan's questions and comments, it's also interesting that the Muslim World League, which was funding mosques and fund mosques internationally, and certainly in Europe and in the United States, were funding Muslim Brotherhood and Islamist imams for many decades and supporting the radicalization of Europeans, including European Muslims, for decades. So the fact now that the Muslim World League has been sort of wrestled out of the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood and Yosef Qaradawi and other influences, they're now from the top down attempting to reform mosques internationally, and they're cutting off the funding of radical imams and mosques around Europe and in the United States. So there is work to be done internationally and diplomatically in trying to support reformers and not sort of have this sort of low expectations that all these European Muslims are going to be radicalized. There's support. The radicals have support and infrastructure that I think should be attacked and put in the hands of reformers if possible. And of course, this lessens the anti-Semitism and the anti-democratic and sexist sentiment, which anybody, I think deeply concerned about notions of citizenship and democratic principles and human rights should be addressing. Which brings me to my question, Joel. You described the alliance between the Red-Green Alliance or the Islamist left extreme alliance. So can you explain it, I guess, conceptually or politically? So at one level, one thing that unites these two extremist ideologies, which is some of it is prevalent, I would argue, in mainstream academia, in Middle East studies and beyond, and cultural studies. Aside from this sort of commonality of displacing Western or American hegemony, what other connections does the extreme left and the extreme green really have in common? Why this deep, profound, contradictory alliance, in your opinion?
Well, that's really the main question. But as I said,
Could you put the microphone closer to you?
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, like this, I will scream a little bit more. According to me, if you speak only about the Brussels region, I think it's just a question of, I would say, electoralism. It's anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist electoralism. If you know that within few years, 50% of the population will have a Muslim background, and if you know that the separation between, in the Parliament of Brussels, the Greens has one MP less than the Socialists, you have to understand that the question is who's got the Muslim vote will rule the Brussels region. This is that's why we can say it's not anti-Semitism, but it will be Islamophilia without, just for pragmatic reasons. It's pragmatism. You have to understand it. And that's why also maybe I speak about the Stockholm Syndrome, because here they are. Demography is a reality that cannot be changed. And you know that 40% of the secondary pupils are Muslim, but if you take into consideration the primary school, it's going to be 55%. You understand what I mean? So the question is, if you want to rule Brussels, you have to please this electorate. And it means you have to go to church, you have to go to mosques, and you have to choose, I would say, people connected to the Islam Brotherhood more than, I would say, secular Muslim. And we have a lot of secular Muslims, but they are isolated, like we are, in a sense. It's not easy in our country, in my country, to defend, for instance, Samuel Paty, who has been, decapitated, because it's not politically correct. We are in Brussels, we're not in Paris. So this is what I would say, pragmatism, Islamophilia, if you understand what I try to.
Yeah. So Joel, thank you. For those listening, Joel recently published a report that's in our Flashpoint, a book on BDS. Joel, we should, Ira will circulate, we'll make an announcement about your book. It's important. And you recently published on Flashpoint. If you go to the ISGAP website, you can see an article that Joel recently wrote. We published it last week. So Joel, as well, always.
At the French, of course, there is a French 70-page report that can be seen on the Jean Jaurès Foundation, on the website of Jean Jaurès, and it has been published in Paris, because it's not easier to publish in Paris than in Brussels.
Joel, if you could send the link to Ira, and we'll send it out in an announcement.
Of course.
Thank you. All right, so thank you for being here. The next Fellows seminar is on the 2nd of March with Rafi Cohn. We'll be speaking about hate on the internet and important research that he's doing. He's a professor of politics at Hull in the UK. And if you go to our website, we have many seminars now in English, Spanish, and in Arabic. We're doing cutting edge work in Arabic, which with leading intellectuals from throughout the Arab speaking region or world, as some people say. And next week, we're starting a very important seminar series on anti-Semitism in Southeast Asia with some fascinating scholars. So this all the information's on our website. And thank you very much for being here, Joel. Again, on behalf of everybody, thank you. It was wonderful. Your work is so important and spot on. And everybody stay safe and well. And see you back here soon, I hope. Thanks for coming.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Joel.
Merci, salut, Tarent.
Merci
Nice to see
beaucoup.
you. Next time in Prague.